Hi, this is Jim Cranston from 7 Every Minute and 7everyminute.com, the podcast of website about reimagining your life. Thanks for joining me tonight to talk about working through, well, those scary life decisions. So let's get started. If you like what you hear today, please leave a like, subscribe, tell your friends, send me a message. Thanks for joining me tonight to talk about moving towards your goals in life, even when the needed decisions are a little or maybe a lot scary. But first, you may have noticed that the reappearance of an overshirt where I live, we've been having nighttime temperatures down into the 40s or single digits in Celsius. And the leaves are starting to turn, so there's no denying that the seasons are starting to change. So I occasionally listen to Gary Vee or Gary Vaynerchuk, and he just had his his VCon, his in person conference recently ended, and he had a replay up on YouTube of his closing speech, and it was actually it was very good. And so Gary's written a children's book now, and he has some other kids' stories and things. And he was talking about two of his characters in those stories and books and their personality attributes. He has a name and then kind of an alliteration towards the attribute he's trying to use as an example. So he has like for adaptability, he has a little alien, and for courageous, he has a cockatoo. And he was talking about too, and in that context, he was describing what he saw holding back most people. He was talking to a lot of people at his conference and people he coaches and comes in contact with. And what's holding them back from making the changes in their lives that they really want to make. They really want to do it, but they just can't quite seem to get started. And he said it, and he said something pretty interesting, and I quote it now: "Is if you don't change, it's because of fear of what might go wrong. So be courageous. But if things go wrong, it just requires adaptability. You're afraid that things will go wrong and you'll move backwards, but things are already wrong, and you're already moving backwards in your life. You will never regret your acts of courage." End quote. And I thought it was very interesting, right? That was a pretty tough thing to listen to because honestly, all of us, well, in general, we generally do kind of follow that pattern. We often wrap it up in nice sounding words, such as, we're taking a safe choice or we're being financially conservative. But in reality, that usually means we're fearful of a potential outcome. But living in that space of fear is exactly what leads us to mediocrity and settling for things. Seth Godin, who I was also listening to recently, said it pretty nicely. And again, I quote: "The most important thing is that you do things that might not work. People who are mediocre aren't lazy, they're afraid. They've been pushed by the educational industrial complex to not make a mistake, to make everything defensible, to follow the leader, to fit in all the way." End quote. Now, probably there's a part of your brain starting to spin up all the arguments why what I just said, why it's not that easy to say. It's easy to say, but my circumstances, they're different, and off we go, justifying our lifestyles and accepting mediocrity. And this is very much a we, a plurality. I'm not saying, this isn't a criticism in any way. Society drills this into our very being, literally from before we're even born. Don't dress differently. Don't act differently. Don't question the teacher. Don't propose an alternative answer to the ones that's expected. And perhaps most importantly, don't take risks and don't be different in any way. It's somewhat amazing that anyone anywhere is ever able to escape the confines of society's defined behaviors. Yet, people do it all the time. Many do it by being negative. The bad boys and girls, the outlaws, and those are what are normally held up as kind of the negative role models for unacceptable behavior. See, if you're different, if you drop out, if you don't go to college, you could end up like, little Johnny over there. See, he made nothing of his life. And yet many of our biggest entrepreneurs dropped out of college and are multimillionaires or billionaires. But in reality, often silently, and perhaps with the struggle aspect of it downplayed, there are many other people who didn't follow society's rules and are often successful, sometimes wildly successful. As we talked about before, Charlie Munger and Warren Buffett, the investors, they didn't follow the rules on how to make money the modern way. And instead, they tended to invest in solid companies who actually produced, they had a real product. They produced something, not a concept, not software, and they ended up some of the richest individuals in the world. Elon Musk started a car company from scratch, which everyone knew was something you just couldn't do anymore. And despite all the predictions, has been successful thus far. Everyone laughed at Jeff Bezos for trying to sell, at first, books and then everything online when you could just go to any number of local stores and get what you needed. Then they punished the stock. I remember this very clearly. They punished the stock when he foolishly invested in even more warehouses instead of going virtual, because that's obviously the way of the future. And in a crazy move, started to compete with his own two biggest shipping companies with a dedicated shipping fleet. People don't laugh anymore and instead talk about his great business vision. And that's the key. When it isn't obvious, it's crazy. And once it's successful, it becomes obvious. In all those examples, the individuals involved were taking huge risks, but they focused on being adaptable and courageous and took the risk anyway and succeeded. It's been said before that, being courageous isn't not being fearful, it's having the fear and moving ahead through it. Of course, large rewards have inherent risk, and I'm not saying don't be prudent, don't think things through. But our brain, and we've talked about this a lot, our brain is heavily biased towards keeping us safe and comfortable. There are multiple studies that show when people have reached the point of maximum effort or point of exhaustion, especially in athletics, that limit is really a pretty conservative stopping point the brain created to ensure that there was always a safety margin still remaining. One of my favorite studies is when male college athletes, they're tested with either, they'll be in a lab or a lab environment, and then they have the equipment they're going to work out on or whatever, and they can either have a male or a female technician to observe them. So pretty consistently, they performed better when there was a woman observing them, suggesting that when they felt the need to impress somebody, they were able to go right through that first safety limit and do additional exercises. But this aspect of our brain, being slightly overprotective, isn't reserved just for physical activities. The brain applies this very conservative, overly safe approach to most situations, including our life choices. I started taking an executive MBA program at RPI many years ago in Troy, New York. And then I didn't actually enter the program. Of course, the claimed reason by my brain was, money was an object, but I'm sure my brain was lying, and there were other reasons why I didn't enter. But nonetheless, but from the people I knew in that course, I stayed in touch with them, and was invited to graduation. It was really neat. But the people I knew in that course, I was one of the big things that I learned was that high achievers often just don't believe it when the brain says it can't be done. I've adapted that attitude in a number of areas, and in general, it works out pretty well. If you absolutely are overwhelmed and there's no chance of completing something on time, just start on it anyway and give it your best effort. You might be amazed at the focus and the cleverness your brain can generate once it realizes you're going to go ahead with it no matter what. Our brains are very good at keeping us from failing, and so they will switch into solution mode and find a path to success. The important part is to focus on the next task. Ignore the thoughts that it's all impossible and overwhelming. Your brain will usually come up with ways to make the impossible either fully possible or find a workable solution to attain the best possible outcome. But that's for a very specific task. What about life's decisions? These big things that are, many, much times larger than like solving one problem. Well, most of life's decisions, even the big ones, are really driven by a number of interrelated tasks. When we feel overwhelmed, it's usually because instead of thinking about how to solve the next totally solvable task, we let ourselves get focused on the enormity of the overarching problem, and that leads to overwhelm. And that same thought process can happen when we want to make significant changes in our own lives. Our brain, good little protector that it is, immediately comes up with every reason in the world, well, what we're thinking about doing is just crazy. And it really is far safer to just continue as we are, don't make any changes. And of course, we complain about it, that's part of the whole deal. But, don't change, don't put yourself at risk. But that's usually driven by a fear of the unknown. We've talked about this before, and we'll talk about it again on how to solve that problem. But the most important point for tonight is that usually we, with society's help, have created these roadblocks to our own personal growth based upon our own biases and fear of a perceived catastrophic unknown. By identifying each impossible task before it arrives and giving our brain time to consider solutions, we can usually solve or pretty much totally mitigate each blocker and move on to the next step. This allows us to then move closer to a life consistent with our vision and to be successful in whatever way really matters to ourselves. So I would encourage you not to let perceived or self-created fears keep you from taking that next step towards your true vision. If you just start and take that next step, no matter how small, you might be surprised at how those enormous roadblocks are removed by your own self-confidence, courage, belief in yourself, and your brain's cleverness. So that's it for the evening. Remember, society likes to keep us all in whatever life status we're in because that helps keep society nice and tidy and orderly. But if your vision points you in a different direction and you want to grow personally, don't be afraid to try and live to your fullest potential and try one of those crazy ideas. Once you believe in yourself, your brain will do amazing things to make the impossible possible. Your homework, always optional, is to think of some crazy goal you've always had and consider if it's really important to you. Is this thing or accomplishment something that really has meaning in your life? If yes, that's excellent. If not, move on to the next item on your wish list until you find something that really and truly is important to you. Extra points if you now take that one item and think about the very next thing you'd have to do to make it a reality. The next step can be tiny, even as small as just writing a short description of what your goal is and why it matters to you, and very importantly, when you want to get it done. Extra points if you take that next step. Congratulations. You're on your way to a life that you really had envisioned. So that's it again. Thank you very much for stopping by. Regular reminders, ukr7.com. Remember, number of wars and issues and elections being contested and just lots of stuff going on in the world. UKR7 is a site with links where you can support activities in Ukraine. The other one that we always talk about, World Central Kitchen, WCK.org. They work in disaster areas, usually by taking local food and getting it to a point where it can be prepared and delivered to people. Two great organizations. The World Central Kitchen works all around the world. But as we always talk about, it's one of those things where if you're not in a position or you don't want to give to an international organization, certainly that's fine. If you can donate locally, that's fine too. And if you can't donate, that's fine too. There's a lot of ways you can change the world and make it a little better place. Even something simple, and we talk about this every week, just smiling at somebody who looks like they're having a Band-Aid. It's like, good morning, how's it going? That's all it takes. Living outside yourself changes your perspective on the world and can make the world much better in ways you hadn't expected. Remember, one of the best ways to care for yourself is to care for others. So, as always, thank you for stopping by. If you found something interesting or useful, please pass it along and please subscribe, hit that like button. If not, please drop me a comment as to what you'd like to hear. Have a great week. Remember to live the life that you dreamed of because that's the path to true contentment. Love and encouragement to everyone. See you next week on 7 Every Minute and 7everyminute.com. Thank you.